Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Holliday, president of the Tallahassee Historical Society. When I shoot these videos, I am normally wearing blue jeans and a sloppy shirt and a sloppy hat, but I am here today in the library of Temple, Israel, down on Mahan Street with Dr. Kurt Peeler with Florida State University, and who is also head of the Institute for World War II and the Human Experience, which when I was at FSU was on the 4th floor of the Bellamy building, but which I've been informed is now part of Strozier Library, and I'm very, very pleased, very pleased to hear that. Dr. Peeler is our speaker on Thursday night, November the 10th, at the Governor Martin House in Myers Park. Dr. Peeler has written a really extraordinary book. Whenever I teach World War II, I tend to focus on the racial aspect of it because World War II was in many ways quintessentially a racist war on many sides. But also, but religion and the religion, particularly how you get soldiers to fight. Well, there are a couple of ways to do that. One is to dehumanize the enemy. The other one, of course, is a kind of a religious motivation. And both of these factors are going to be very involved in World War II. So I was reading this book, and here it is. It's called A Religious History of the American GI in World War II. And I would like to introduce the subject of his talk to us by reading you a little something from his book. This is from Rabbi David Eichhorn, who in 1939 founded Temple Israel here in Tallahassee, who was chaplain in the U.S. Army. And I thought I would read you all this passage from this. In counseling GIs, chaplains at times aggressively attempted to assist them in working out their personal problems. In counseling a man whose marriage was troubled, Rabbi David Eichhorn wrote a letter to the soldier's wife reporting that her husband, stationed at Camp Croft, South Carolina, was still in love with her and had expressed a keen desire to continue the marriage. He chastised her for objecting to her husband sending $5 of his monthly pay to his grandmother, maintaining that any religious and ethical person would agree with his decision. He further admonished her for having broken up housekeeping, stored the furniture, and joining the WACs, insisting that traditional gender roles that reinforced patriarchy should be maintained for the good of her husband and the army. Neither the GI nor his spouse was Jewish, and Eichhorn called for her to visit an unbiased person, preferably your family minister who had presided over her marriage. Sounds like Rabbi Eichhorn was not a shrinking violet on matters like this.
He's a remarkable figure. I learned about Rabbi Eichhorn before I came to Tallahassee to teach at FSU, and I remember very excited when I got to go to the synagogue he founded and saw his name on the plaque. Eichhorn was, how do I put it, no shrinking violet on really some important moral issues. For example, when he was a rabbi at Texarkana, there was an African American accused of murdering a white person, essentially, and he successfully got an attorney from the Jewish community, called on the community to come to his defense, and got this guy acquitted by an all-white jury. And
that's pretty remarkable.
He, like a lot of clergy, like a lot of Protestant ministers, but a lot of rabbis, in the 20s and early 30s were pacifists, and he said he disavowed his pacifism when he saw the threat of fascism, and even tried to enlist in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade to fight in the Spanish Civil War. So he could be very opinionated in dealing with marriage counseling issues, but also had incredible moral courage. And I think one of the important stories about World War II, there are two true groups of true volunteers in World War II, because it's a draftee army. The two volunteers groups are women. Women cannot be drafted. They toy with the idea of drafting women nurses, but they back off. Right. And clergy who serve as chaplains. Clergy were automatically exempt from service, and so any chaplain in World War II is a true volunteer. And Eichhorn had a family.
How old was he?
He was in his 30s. He was ordained a rabbi in 31, so he was in his late 30s when he's a rabbi.
Now,
when he's a chaplain.
Did he serve just in the European?
Just in the European theater.
Yeah. So God, that must have been. I mean, I know that at least one diary survives, and I'm sure lots and lots of letters. I mean, and plus he was at the liberation of
yeah, we should know.
Yeah.
I mean, what's great about I discovered him because luckily his grandson, along with a script writer for documentaries, edited his papers, and so this volume of the GI Rabbi, in fact, includes his Rosh Hashanah service he gave here in Temple Israel in 1940, when he talks about world events, and he's talking about the bravery of the British people in defying Nazi Germany. And he says it's time for the American Jews to meet that fight, to display the same level of bravery as the British people.
I'm going to date this a little bit, I guess, by the time, there is a PBS documentary that starts tonight, Ken Burns' documentary on the Holocaust and the United States. And I haven't seen anything about it, but I'm sure that part of that will have to do with, who knew what when and so forth. I mean, as far as what was going on over there, I assume you've seen a lot of his letters and stuff.
Well, I mean, everyone knew the Holocaust. I mean, not everyone, but those who were paying attention knew the Holocaust was happening. So in this volume, in 1943, he is giving a radio talk on basically the camp radio station, and he is talking about the murder of European Jewry, and it was in 1942, in December of 1942, the United Nations, the Allies condemned the murder of the Jews. It's front page news in the New York Times, and so we did not know the full extent of how the Holocaust was unfolding, but it's pretty clear by late 42 the murder of the Jews is occurring. And action is being taken, although there's very little in many ways we can do. I mean, there's some wonderful correspondence in terms of getting at this question and to see how complicated it is. So in late 1942, the U.S. State Department is trying to suppress the Rieger telegram, which is about the unfolding of the Holocaust.
We didn't know anything about the Wannsee Conference, I guess.
But in that same period, because he's now part of the State Department, Myron Taylor, the personal representative of Franklin Roosevelt to the Vatican, is having meetings in the Vatican asking the Pope to denounce the Holocaust. They don't use the term Holocaust, but the extreme murder of the Jews, and he is getting nowhere with the Pope, with the Vatican bureaucracy. And so we know a lot. The other thing I think that's important to understand about the unfolding of the Holocaust is liberation is occurring almost from the minute territory is liberated. So. So European Jewry greet the Allies in North Africa. There's a wonderful story. Don Whitehead, the journalist, when he ends up in the Jewish quarter of Tripoli when it's liberated by the British, people just flock around him, and they're celebrating him because he's part of the Allies. Eichhorn talks about finding and liberating, cleaning up synagogues and meeting the needs of the remnant of Jewry in France. And so and he talks about doing, raising funds to save those who survived the Holocaust they encountered. So you're encountering liberated Jews all through the North African, the Italian, the battle for France, the battle for Germany, and you're finding both the survivors, but also the often desecrated synagogues.
Now, was it Was it the movie director George Stevens who was there at Dachau?
Yeah,
yeah.
I believe it's Stevens. Yeah,
was Eichhorn, in the first?
He is very shortly after liberation. He is not necessarily. I forgot. I have not actually traced the exact day, but he's there early enough when he sees. He talks about the murder of guards. Standing by as guards are murdered, and basically they do not intervene. And in fact. There was one American unit that actually killed German POWs, German recently captured guards in cold blood. Yeah, which shows you the level of anger and Eichhorn's very blunt about it. I mean, he says, we just stood by. We were raped. It's a very disturbing story he tells. I think one of the things that keeping in mind about places like Dachau, these are not the extermination camps. These are the concentration camps. These were not designed like Auschwitz or Treblinka to kill people systematically. I mean, they did kill people, right? But they were in many ways more penal camps and punitive, and they were horrific places. Don't get me wrong, but they have most of the inmates are not Jews, and in fact, there's a real level of anti-Semitism. He initially cannot hold service. There's an issue of holding the services outdoors because of the level of anti-Semitism. And threats of violence directed at the survivors who were Jewish. And then this director who's from Hollywood, he's like, I've been sent here to do a film. Yeah. You will hold the service outdoors. And so he goes to the American Common and says, I want security for this. And Eichhorn is able to have the service outdoors. And I would say not all the Poles were anti-Semitic, but there was a strong level of anti-Semitism present among some of the liberated.
Adonai Melech, Adonai Moloch, Adonai Imloch le'olam va'ed, Adonai oz la'amo yitain, Adonai yivarech et amo b'shalom.
Now you said something to me a few minutes ago, which was pretty interesting. You said that his enlisting to do that was not necessarily well received here in Tallahassee.
I think that the issue that clergy all over the country faced was, Eichhorn had a wife and children, and a lot of them. I don't know if he took a cut and pay, but a lot of chaplains did take a cut and pay. To serve, particularly if they came from prestigious churches.
But he didn't come back here, you said?
He ended up not coming back. They did not, they kind of...
Where'd they go? I got to find out.
I'm not sure the immediate... He ended up, much of his career was in South Florida.
Oh, okay.
And in many ways, this was a very small congregation then. So I suspect he also did better. But I think he did initially want to come back. His plan was to come back, and I think he wrote a letter saying, I'm not so pleased about that. But that was an issue for a lot of particularly ministers and rabbis. Now, priests, it was a little bit different. Priests were assigned by their bishop. Roman Catholic priests were assigned by their bishop, and so they knew there was a place for them when they came home. The issue for a lot of priests was their bishop wouldn't let them serve, so some bishops would not part with them, and some priests tried to write to the chief of chaplains begging to serve, and they said, "I'm sorry, if the bishop doesn't let you, I can't. There's no shortcut."
One of the things I liked about your book is that at the same time that there was a concerted effort for the different faiths to work together and be ecumenical, and at the same time there was a fair amount of competition. I love the story of the Protestants setting their services up right before the movies. There's
a lot of tension between not so much the average GI, but between the Catholic chaplains and a number of Protestant chaplains, and particularly the leadership of both churches. The Catholic hierarchy didn't want their boys corrupted by Protestantism, and they felt that Protestants were going to lure them in. On the other hand, I mean, reading some of the rhetoric of some of the Protestant, particularly the Protestant leaders, I mean, they view the Catholic Church as this. I mean, the thing
Popery, the evils of Popery.
Yeah, but also I just laugh because they do think that Catholic priests are cut above better than a lot of the Protestants. Not all, but a lot of their chaplains. They have angst about some of those Protestant chaplains. but they think of the church as having a bottomless supply of priests. And I often thought if they only knew the future of the priesthood in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And in fact, there were not enough Catholic priests, even though it was a huge expansion.
How many chaplains were there?
There were almost 20,000 chaplains serving. Yeah, it was a huge expansion of the chaplaincy. They didn't quite get to the 1 out of 1,200, but it was enormous. And what was so interesting, I mean, one of the things I found fascinating about World War II is we had never invested so much in the religious life of the GI until World War II, that we, for the first time, really do sincerely want to try to have a chaplain, ideally a chaplain, one chaplain for every 1,200 men. We also want to make it representative, which meant an unprecedented number of priests and rabbis were serving. And we also built chapels systematically at Army bases for the first time. And we also, the government expense, prints out for the Army Protestant, Roman Catholic, and Hebrews, Jewish scriptures.
I mean, I'll be honest, I did not realize until I read your book just how religious Franklin D. Roosevelt was.
Yeah.
I thought, it was Franklin D. Roosevelt, but he was apparently.
Yeah, no, I think you could criticize him at times. He was not a very theologian.
Right.
He did, he got criticized for not going to church enough, and he lost the Protestant vote in part because he was for repealing prohibition. But religion really was important to him. It genuinely, his closest advisor said, this is really important, and he uses religious rhetoric all the time, and it's what I was really struck by is his embrace of religious pluralism. He really, one of the things that didn't make the cut of the book, his belief in. When his mother died, he arranged that at a discount that his mother's home in Manhattan would be bought by Hunter College, and that house was a center for interfaith understanding between Protestant Catholics and Jews. And I also did not fully grasp how close his relationship was to some of his Jewish advisors. So Samuel Roseman, he writes about, like, when he first worked for Roosevelt, it was just a job. But he said, I basically fell in love with the guy because he was just great to work with. He was very down to earth at times. He really loved to chat. He was good company. But he said, I'd really never met a man in politics. He didn't matter rich or poor, your background, Protestant, Catholic, or Jew. That was irrelevant. And the Rosemans lived with him in an era where there were real estate covenants. When there's a lot of, if you've seen the movie from 1947, Gentleman's Agreement, a lot of anti-Semitism, and a whole aspects of, I mean, Roosevelt had the Rosemans live with him in the governor's mansion. He had this whole household, and then, and they were incredibly close. I mean, he was close to Roosevelt, both professionally and personally. I mean, Roseman, along with Sherwin Anderson, wrote some of his most famous speeches. Yeah,
that's true. Well, we hope that you will attend our meeting on November the 10th, again at the Governor Martin House in Myers Park. We are really looking forward to this, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kurt Peeler.
גשר צר מאוד, גשר צר מאוד, גשר צר מאוד, כל העולם כולו, גשר צר מאוד, גשר צר מאוד. The whole world is a narrow bridge, a very narrow bridge, a very narrow bridge. The whole world is a very narrow bridge, a very